Christina, do you have any kids?
No, stepdaughter and step grandbabies. Yeah, she's older, she's 27 now in San Diego. Yeah, it's a nice set. Little pricey, but.
I started telling my kids their stories of how they were born. My 5-year-old, the first day, she was like, I don't think I want kids anymore now. After we heard about the epidural and stuff, and the next day she's like, I think I'm gonna adopt.
So anyway,
I think I'll be adopted.
That's pretty funny. Okay. Sharice, can you hear me? Or Yamir, whoever can unmute,
I can hear you, Christina.
thank you. This is the maintenance committee, I know everyone is on his way. And streaming and is in board docs, so whenever you are ready.
good afternoon and welcome to the Monday, October 7th, 2024 Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We're glad that you've joined us. Thank you to the board members who are here. Thank you to Superintendent and Deputy Foster for being with us today. We will go ahead and get started. The first update, we'll start with updates and reports. So the first one, 1.01, is the fiscal year financial results preliminary for 2023-2024. And I will turn it over to the superintendent.
Yes, and I know that I'm doing a cameo here. Normally is Deputy Foster in this meeting. However, I am going to ask Deputy Foster, while it's not in your presentation, that you also just give an update for not just the committee, but for the community relative to the state inquiry. I know that there is a State Board of Education meeting later this week, and we did not get a copy of what was going to be presented last time, and I'm not sure that we're going to get a copy of what's going to be presented this week. And so, but we do have notes from when the representatives from the technical assistance provider were here. So if you can do a voiceover on that, and then also at some point, do you chairperson talking about the need to do a deeper dive into the school consolidation and related policies, right? Given that there are implications as we talk about financial sustainability. Yeah, so I'll pause there and then Deputy Foster, turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the first thing, as the board chair said, is to look at the FY24 preliminary. So you do have in your packet preliminary fiscal year 23-24 results. These are the pre-audit results. So there are sort of, changes and tweaks that will come as a result of the audit. The audit gets completed no later than December 31st. So that's what makes these preliminary. So just, full disclosure on that. And so I'm going to hit the sort of highlights, but obviously stop me and ask questions as I go. We ended, again, preliminarily ended FY24 with a deficit of about $4.9 million in the general fund. What I will say is that primarily comes from tuition exceeding what we had budgeted. There's a number of other areas. It's sort of there's things that exceeded what we projected in the budget, and there's some things that come in under what was projected in the budget. And in the end of that process, where we landed is 4.9 in the red. And you see some other areas that were favorable in your memo. But what I just want to mention is that the $4.9 million deficit, as you all know, we engaged with the city and with the Office of the Treasurer around accessing funding from our OPEB trust, which is a trust fund that has funds dedicated to paying retiree benefits. And so we got an actuarial report, I think, in May that indicated that we were 111% funded in our OPEB trust, which is good news. Means we're secured against paying those liabilities in the future, and did make us feel comfortable, essentially covering our retiree benefits for FY24 with funds from the trust. So normally, we haven't been contributing to the trust for a number of years. So rather than contributing to the trust, what we've been doing is paying the retiree benefits out of our operating budget. And so this year, we're essentially paying the general fund back with the money we had contributed to the retiree costs, and then backfilling that funding with money from the OPEB trust. That's going to be about 1.35 million. That is the contribution from the OPEB trust. So that's going to bring our overall deficit down to about 3.7 million. And so with that in mind, I believe next week we're going to be bringing before the board, there's a $5.6 million non-lapsing fund the city holds as a reserve fund for the board. And so we're going to be asking to access 3.7 billion of the non-lapsing fund to close the remaining FY24 deficit. That's a vote that you all would have to make, and then the city council has to approve that as well. So it's funding held by the city, so the city council has to approve us accessing that funding. I will say, this is really a shout out to our finance team. This is highlighted in the memo. We have an EFS report, which is our end of year spending report that we filed with the state, and it's due by September 1st. This year, the first, I believe, was a holiday, and so September 2nd. And I think for the first time in several years, we were able to meet that deadline, which is important. It's a challenging deadline for us and every other school district, because having to do your end of year financial report the week after school starts is difficult. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the finance team for getting that work done, as well as getting all of our end of year grant reports filed by the deadline as well. So I'll just, if you go into the actual reports, on the all funds, so I'll actually go to the general fund, you'll see at the bottom, that's where the $4.99 million deficit shows up. And then I want to just highlight in the special funds. So if you look at the special funds, and board chair, you shared some questions with me on this, so I want to speak to it. You see a balance on a number of grants when you look at the special funds. And so that balance column is if you take the adjusted budget number and deduct what the expenditures were, that's what remains. And so you do see remaining funds in a number of grants. But what I want to highlight is for the vast majority of grants where you see a balance, if you start with, for example, the federal grants, which is page 1 of the special funds report, you can see ARP funds, which those don't expire until September 30th. It didn't expire, I should say, until September 30th. And again, this is the as of June 30th report. And if you look at, there's a number of title funds, IDEA funds, as well as SIG. That's where you see a lot of the balances there. Those funds all allow carryover into the new fiscal year. And so that's why you see balances on those. There's a couple others. There's the Connecticut Children's Medical Center grant, which is part of our North Hart Ascends pipeline funding. That's a multi-year grant. So I just want to highlight on the federal grants where you see a balance. That's because those are grants eligible to carry over. If you go to the state grants, which is a couple pages further in, I will highlight a couple here, which are of concern for us, and we can talk a little about grant spend down, but there are a couple of magnet grants where there's a remaining balance, and those are not grants that carry over. And so there are reasons, and one of the things we're working through is making sure we tighten up our processes to make sure we spend as much of those grants as possible. One of the things that's been true for the last several years is that some of the magnet grants, they're extra dollars that are allocated to us after the year is underway, in some cases very late. And then we're still expected to spend it down by June 30th, and that's proven problematic in some cases. The other thing I'll say about the reason it's sort of concentrated in magnet grants is the other dynamic that happens with our magnet grants is they're usually allocated out to individual magnet schools. And so we're working with the principals of each of those schools to identify how they want to use their specific allocation. And so we can't submit the grant as a whole until we have the budget and allocation from each school where we know how each school wants to use that funding. So I can certainly speak to that more if that would be helpful. And then on the private grants, private and foundation grants, which is the last page of your grant report, again, we have some that have remaining balances. That again is largely because they're all used. The first one you see, the Bar Foundation with 361,000 balance. That again is a multi-year grant, and so that money carries over into the new year. I can pause there before we go into the other ones.
Do any of the committee members have questions for Paul?
Could you talk a little bit more about the overall, the general budget deficit? How much are we saving from all the vacancies, and how much would that have been exacerbated had we had no vacancies?
It would have been dramatically exacerbated if we hadn't had vacancies. So in the FY 24 budget, we built in a 6% vacancy assumption. So essentially, what that means is the actual expenditures that were planned in FY 24. Sorry, I should have said a 6% vacancy rate translated to $21 million in salaries and fringe benefits. And so essentially what that means is the budget of the total budgeted expenditures, if we were fully staffed, were $21 million higher than what you actually see in the budget document.
Right.
And so that would have been, so we came in right around that 6% for last year. When you look across, I mean, we were higher than that at the start of the year, but worked through it over the course of the year. So we didn't end up with a deficit because of that, but we certainly didn't end up with any extra surplus either. It's one of the challenges. I mean, I think this has been our practice for years, but building that vacancy assumption into the budget, you know, if you don't hit that assumption, you're building a deficit in right from the start.
Is it, I mean, is it incentivizing filling those vacancies because we know it's going to widen the budget gap and that shortfall?
Well, unfortunately, I would say I wish that was a problem. It hasn't been because we haven't been able to fill the vacancies, and I think we lowered the assumption for FY 25 from 6% to 5% because we genuinely thought in a post-ESSER world, where lots of districts reduced positions, that the labor market was going to be different and we were having an easier time filling, and it hasn't been true.
It bounced.
So right now we're above 10% and we only budgeted for 5%. So I don't think it hasn't created a disincentive, certainly from hiring.
Okay.
I mean, I think we'd certainly have to come back to you. If we had that problem, we'd have to then come back to you and figure out how to solve it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I recognize that in the all funds budget, not all of these things will even be applicable to cover some of the general fund costs. But I mean, maybe not a projection, but how much do you think of that budget could we be covering general fund costs? Like how much of that is even applicable?
How much of,
Right, it's like $13 million.
how much from the special funds could we have used to cover? our
Right,
gap?
yeah,
What I would say on that is we used every bit we could.
right.
And so the 4.9 I'm coming to with you tonight, is essentially where we left at the end of that. So one of the things we go through that exercise every year, really in May, June, July, because we still, right in the month of July, we can still book charges back to the previous
Reclassing.
fiscal. Yeah, so essentially, we reclass every expenditure we can reclass
Gotcha.
onto grants, and that's really how we got to the 4.9.
Hmm.
It's really, you know, what we're paying attention to is eligibility,
Right.
compliance, right? What can this grant be used for?
And then under the general fund outlay total, you have other operating expenses at a deficit of 6.7.
Yeah,
Can you just give us a little bit of a
part of what happens, I mean, I can certainly do more detail.
what that is? I don't even, not that I don't care what the balance is, I just sort of want to know what goes into that line.
Yeah, I'd have to get you a more specific answer on that. What I can say in terms of the deficit number you see there, you see a big tuition is real. I mean, that's just a tuition deficit. What you see in certified salaries and other operating expenses is as we're closing the year and we're doing a lot of expenditure reclasses and moving things around. And even over the course of the year, right? If we have, I'll give an example, if we have something break in a building that requires some kind of unbudgeted maintenance cost, we might move money because of the vacancy savings. What we're tending to do is move budgetary money out of things like certified salaries or other operating expenses to cover gaps in other places. So that the deficit shows up in certified salaries and other operating just because that's where it shows up after we reclassify things.
Thanks.
Deputy Foster, can you talk a little more to the tuition being over about how it is mainly special ed? Like, can you talk a little bit more to
tuition.
the tuition?
Yeah, so our tuition, let me actually speak to the actual number, right? So you see $100 million in expenditures for tuition. Only less than 30 million of that is general education tuition. The vast majority of what you see in the tuition line item is special education. And that is, part of that is because we don't pay general education tuition for students who go to open choice schools. So we only pay general ed tuition to students who go to other magnet operators like Craig or Goodwin. But we pay special ed costs for students who go anywhere. So students go to open choice seats, students who go to magnet seats, And then the cost of drivers that we've experienced, you know, in terms of like, an obvious question is why have we not hit the, you know, why is our projection off? Like, why do we have such a large deficit in tuition? And I think one of the big reasons for that is it's hard to know where it's gonna land. And we've looked at the cost structures, and really over the last 3 or 4 years, we have not seen a dramatic increase in the numbers of our students going out to open choice and magnet, right? So the increase in enrollment of our enrollment going to those providers has slowed in the last 4 years. But what hasn't slowed is the number of those students either requiring special ed or the total amount of services each student is being given. So the example I always give is if, you know, a year ago, a student was getting 1 hour a week of social work services. And then a provider in a PPT meeting comes to the conclusion that they need 5 hours a week of social work services. They just increased the social work cost for that individual student by 5 times. By making that change to the IEP, we have little to no control over what goes on in the PPTs at magnet or open choice operators, but we pay the full bill. And so, you know, in terms of why the unpredictability, I guess, and the rapid growth of our tuition, it's almost all in the last few years at least, it's almost all attributable to increasing shares of the students who are going to those providers who have IEPs, and an increasing average cost per student for students going to those providers, which again is various versions of service delivery.
And because of the increase in the rate as well, right? So I know that it's,
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, I guess, so
Yes.
you're right, I should have,
Yeah.
that's really a third factor, so, and it is always a tricky one, because we charge the same. So CREC tends to be, because they're one of the largest operators, they tend to set the rate. So CREC will set a rate and say, this is what a social work should cost per hour. Or that what they're gonna charge, everybody else just uses their rate, including us. We just have a much smaller number of kids coming to us for whom we bill SPED than we have students going out for whom we get billed for SPED. And so, yeah, that's a third, so the rate increases, the total average number of services per kid, and then the number of students receiving special ed. We looked at data this week that I found this shocking. For Hartford resident children who are in open choice seats, so it's not the magnet, right? That's the open choice suburban seats. 38% are identified for special education. That is a staggering number. From my perspective, it reflects a massive over-identification of Black and brown children.
absolutely, there's a culturally responsive.
That's not all kids in suburban schools. That's our kids going to suburban schools are getting identified at a rate of 38%, which is nearly double what we have internally. And so, you know, we're paying for those services.
We are actually pushing the third inquiry that the state, or the one that the state did not offer, but we asked for around special education, to do a deep dive on some of these trends relative to the identification. What exactly, when did they happen? Was it when the students left or when they were with us? The labels themselves, is it, you know, a behavioral label? Is it a learning, you know, disability? So that we can kind of unpack, but clearly at a glance, there's a significant difference in the amount of students. And remember, those are the PPTs that we're not there for also.
Should have said that. So I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, we attend the PPTs, our staff, for students in magnet placements.
Not
We
in
don't
open
for open
choice.
choice. And even, but I will say, even where we attend, you know,
Yeah.
you imagine the conversation, you're in a PPT meeting. And our person is the one person in the room, right? Everybody in the room is in agreement. This student needs X, Y, and Z services. It's very difficult for our person to be the one person in the room saying no.
And it's not like we would say no, we would typically say there are other ways, right, to meet the needs and or other programs. Ruth, you had a question?
Yes, so just for clarification, I think for people who are following, so we mentioned 2 rates earlier on that people that at first confused me. The rate of percentage of students opting into these other districts has not increased, but the tuition that these other schools are charging has increased. So therefore, the overall cost, because the cost per pupil is increasing, that cost has increased.
Right.
Okay, so on the second point, about students getting IEPs 38%. So I understand that sounds like a disproportionately larger percentage than the average, whatever that average is. I also recall earlier on during my board orientation and so on, it was stated that parents also do specifically seek out those outplacements because they want their children to receive those IEPs. So could it be that that number is inflated? It's not inflated, but it's more so that it's representative of parents realizing that the only way to get their kids those services is to pull them out of Hartford schools. It is, because if we're so short of special ed teachers, right? And I've heard of people I know whose kids are not getting their various services for their IEPs. Right, so if the only other option is to opt out of Hartford and seek school elsewhere, then we will necessarily end up with a higher percentage of kids being assigned an IEP. I still think it's good to know why the IEPs, is it behavioral, is it a learning, this, impairment, like, it's still interesting, but, I think. I mean, it's hard to assign, from my perspective, to assign any other motive than people are trying to seek the best, and these schools are doing what they can, because we can't meet that need currently with the staffing that we have.
I would say, that our staffing challenge has not always been how it is now, right? So we look pre-pandemic, those numbers don't look the way they look now. And so that's one thing. The other thing that I wonder about is when the student actually becomes a special education student. Because if it was that the student was had an IEP before transferring out, that's a different conversation. Whereas we're saying, when in the trajectory of the student's experience, did they become a special ed student? If they become a special ed student, when they go to 6th grade or 8th grade, for example, I would want to question that.
Okay, so I'm not an educator by trade, but can an IEP be assigned because a child is not necessarily impaired, but need extra support so they can reach their level? Right, so if is that not could that not be a purpose?
Technically, no, right? So you should provide intervention supports, which are targeted supports at a tier 2 or tier 3. You go through all of those processes, and if those don't prove to help mitigate, then you would consider a referral for assessment to determine.
Okay,
That's a good question. Clarify.
Well, I think a better question would be, if we are sending the tuition dollars to open choice, why are we also footing the bill for said students if we are no longer responsible for paying for them to begin with? I mean, I guess no one has the answer to that here. I'm just gonna, it's like a state question, but.
Well, the other thing would say that, the state would say, we still get the money for those students, so that's why we're still.
Don't we then send them, don't we send the money?
Well, yeah.
Right.
No, and for the students.
That's their funding at that point.
It is absolutely.
Yes.
And after a certain amount, we don't get reimbursed dollar for dollar.
Or isn't that amount like, isn't that threshold like $100,000 per student or
Yes.
something ridiculous?
Yes.
Can I add something really quick? I was listening on, virtually, so through my experience from being in meetings with families in those outer districts, I got the feeling that, so it'll be like you're almost creating scenarios that the child needs special services, mainly in a few cases because that district can bill Hartford themselves. So it took me just sitting there and figuring out in the moment, like the kid is on level academically a little bit higher than level in like math. And they, oh, well, he's having trouble self-regulating. And mom is saying because of what she described as racism that's like, he can't identify it as a second grader,
Sure.
but it's there from what he describes to her. So he's frustrated, like, me and my friend do the same thing. Even my friend who's from this suburban town is saying, we did the same thing. Why he's suspended and I'm not? So the kids are trying to figure it out in the moment. And then I just said, I asked the question, I said, could you bill for this? And then like they got real like, this isn't about money. We like the meeting took a turn because I'm telling you, we built this you built this program in-house so you can bill for the Hartford students you have. And then at the same school, same kind of situation. The resident child, who also was asking for advocacy, two little black boys, but the resident child of that town was begging for outplacement because they had an autism label and they were fighting the mom on that. But the Hartford, and I'm like, this meeting was like days apart, and it was like the tale of two, like, it was so sad that it was like, and I'm thinking, I know like when, I don't know if everyone watched that Blue Ribbon, their meeting, when the council member was trying to get to that point, saying about the tuition and about those things. And I just thought like no one was being upfront and blunt. Yes, absolutely. They can do this, they don't, and we don't. It was said that Hartford could be at the table. I'm like, Hartford don't even know this meeting happening. Hartford kind of knows when the parent is calling a welcome center, like, please, something is going on. CREC is there and CREC is not saying in the meetings I'm in, you're not saying anything, the parent looking like calling out the CREC person when we were talking privately, you were on my side and you thought, but right now in this meeting, so it just was so disgusting that I'm like, if this is happening in this school, the same school, how many more places like is it happening? So we can't know all the meetings our kids are in, even though they're Hartford resident, like it would be like just so much, but something does have to be changed in regards to Hartford footing the bill on something Hartford has no say in. Like we have experts, we have special ed folks, but they're just making decisions and whatever is, if it's a financial implication from the result of that meeting, Hartford is paying, and we're just like, okay, because we have to pay. So it was very interesting. Your resident child wants a better setting for this student, and you're fighting them because this program you created doesn't serve them. But a Hartford child who is not all the things you're saying, why are we here? Because I don't understand. You're pushing, trying to get them in special ed, you want a label on them. And it just was the difference. You are from Hartford and you are not. That's just what the difference was for me.
May I follow up on that? So thank you for bringing that, so certainly at least to my attention. How would the requested additional inquiry that you're seeking, I sort of got the hint that you're sort of trying to dive into that and see if there's anything that should be addressed there. How is that inquiry hopefully going to unearth some of that information and hopefully help to address that?
I think I just want another entity to say it. Honestly, we have said this so many times over so many years. And we're still here, so I don't know if it's gonna get to where I want it to. I don't know how else to get at it.
Okay. How much of that $100 million in tuition is funds that are being paid to outplacement special ed children?
Well, when you say outplacement, you mean like private outplacement or just not?
The open choice, I should say, the portion that we have.
No, I don't have it from last year, but I do have it off the top of my head for FY 25. It's 87 million of about 120 million in tuition will go to special education for FY 25.
I'm not saying.
Not within Hartford, with other districts
87 million is just about tuition now, that's not paying for any.
that we're not keeping here in Hartford that we have to send.
For our
For our students who are going to non-Hartford school, to open choice school.
I mean, we'll spend 25% of the FY 25 budget on tuition.
Yes.
Right, would you repeat that number? again? What was the number?
25%,
No, yeah, 25% I get, 87 million is,
87 million is.
It's
About 7 of 120.
that's tuition going to open choice.
Sorry,
So I'm trying to compute.
I'm
that's like
sorry, 87 of
75%.
111, because the general ed magnet tuition cap was retained, so that reduced our tuition cost for FY 25, so.
Okay, I just wanna be clear, so 87 of 111.
FY 25, yeah.
And we get what back?
So that's 78%.
Cost.
You're saying 78% of the tuition
That
is
we
being
pay.
paid to schools that are not Hartford, that likely are already better funded on a per pupil basis than Hartford,
Yes.
right? Because I want to be clear about this. So these are districts that are on a per pupil basis, better funded than Hartford, whether it's through property tax or state funds, whatever it is. And we have to pay that amount and we have no say on what type of an IEP or why or when the Hartford resident child
Yes.
is given this IEP.
Yes.
Districts with less of concentrated need as well.
Yeah, I think they can, well, let me phrase the question if I can. Per pupil charge, I don't know if the other districts pay more people than we do.
Well, I just mean per people overall, like if you look at how much money Hartford Public Schools get as a district for each student compared to say a kid in a suburban town, it's likely a lot more than that suburban town. Yet if a student of Hartford goes that same suburban town through the open choice program, we now have to pay a disproportionately larger share of our funds to a school that's already to begin with better funded than we
If I may,
Average, it's larger.
at a district-wide level.
So
Spend, sorry.
Ruth, I'm with you 100%. I had the same feeling. I just don't know if they're quote unquote better funded. I think what the superintendent said is probably they may be, but I think what the superintendent is saying is they have less need.
I
Like
think
it- like
better
it's some
funded
district-
literally means.
No,
more
less
dollars
need and
per
better
student.
funded. She's actually.
I mean,
Well,
literally
there's
more
like-
dollars per pupil, that's what I.
That's what I'm saying, but I don't, well, what I'm saying is, I don't, I'm just saying, I've looked at stuff at times, when I looked at, I don't know, let's pick a district like South Windsor. If I have low needs, I don't know if I need to spend a ton per pupil.
They get increases every year, don't they, in their budget?
Yeah, but the amount of state funding they get, or I don't know, I mean, are we saying that South
I mean,
Windsor
I'm saying
spends
they're-
more per
they're-
pupil than Harvard?
Their local
Harvard
tax
spends
base.
Per pupil?
Yeah, there's local tax bases saying we want to invest in education.
I-
In the state, they are getting more per pupil. It's not, we think Hartford, concentrated need, these kids with more per pupil. No, that's how they get all these courses and these advantages,
Not
because
just-
it's
not
more
just-
per pupil.
I think Paul had something to
And
add.
I just, well, all I was gonna say is,
Yeah.
I do have a 5-year forecast on the agenda.
Yeah.
Some of this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, cause I have the same, I've had the same feelings, I've had the exact same feelings. Occasionally, I remember, I haven't seen numbers that confirm it. What I do see is like what you're saying is, like, communities have more discretionary funding, so to your point. They can spend on some extras because they have more discretionary funding they can throw at education than Hartford does. And what I'm saying, if you have lower need, then potentially you may be spending less per pupil per se, because you have less. I'll leave it alone.
Yeah, I think this needs to be a longer conversation that we have that's not at this exact moment on this agenda
Yeah.
item, but I agree with you.
Yeah, that's
We can
all.
Do this again later,
Yeah, so we can just,
maybe for a meeting that's specifically about funding.
yeah.
I mean, this is a meeting
'cause I
about funding.
think- Yeah, but I think your intuition is correct in that. You're kind of saying Hartford had a lot of need, why are we sending money to districts that have less need?
So,
'Cause that's the way I think that really captures it.
well, I mean, I think, so my view is a little bit more nuanced, I think, than that. I acknowledge that maybe compared to other towns, like maybe Hartford students, probably true, Hartford students have more needs for whatever reason. We have more children who are not native English speakers, right, lower SES status, all of that results in more needs. So that's in fact true, but also if we're going to say we have that need and these students need to be educated, and then Hartford has to pay at a disproportionately higher rate for these students that we already have a concentration of, then we're further exploiting the fund, not exploiting, further exacerbating the funds that we have that's supposed to pay for everyone else. Right, so now we have this structure that's no one's fault in this room, but we have this structure that now pits us against each other, right? If I'm a parent of a kid with special needs, I want my kid to get my IEP, I want them to get all the services that they deserve, right? And if I feel like the only way to do it is to take them to a different district, then that's what, right, that's what I would do. So we can't blame those parents for seeking that. But if there is, as Board Member Brody said, if there is some exploitation or some malicious intent in this entire structure, then that needs to be addressed, right? Because if kids who do not need the IEP that they're being assigned or services at the levels that they're being given, or if kids from Hartford are disproportionately given IEPs compared to their own counterparts in those same schools, then that needs to be addressed.
Just question for responding to you. So anecdotally, I've heard similar, right? So on an anecdotal basis, I was told to folks, in this case, went from Hartford to West Hartford at another point in time. And when this person investigated, right, a disproportionate number of the Black boys were all tagged as special needs in a way that would indicate that the school was potentially using that lane as a way of providing additional services for those young people that potentially, according to the superintendent, probably could be provided through another avenue. But you can throw a label on it and no one challenged them on it, and it just happened. And I only know about this because some teacher took the effort to actually investigate, figure out what's happening to all these kids, and that's what, that's what they found out. So it does happen. I believe Ms. Brody's point is another data point in that. And the only question I would have, though, because the impression I have, I guess, for your direction, is as a home district, we never get to challenge or question the designation they make, and that's kind of the point. We can't second guess. If we send our kid to South Windsor and they say, "Oh, this kid is special need," we have to just eat it.
And even if we did, right, I mean, this is IDEA, this is, federal,
Right, it's, once we're in the position of challenging it, we are looking like the district that doesn't want to service our students, right?
That's
Because we're starting at a losing position.
I don't think the
Right,
law
you're
even
that
lets
social and
you.
say, well, I want to give the kids less, you just don't want that. You
Oh, I
don't want
agree.
the
I'm
uptake.
just saying that that's how they
Right,
issue.
so the policing has to, right, so my view is that if you have a structure, the way you have it set up, people will operate within that structure, so when it's fundamentally flawed potentially, what needs to be addressed is that structural flaw, because humans are humans, we're just gonna operate, whether it's a tax system or any other benefit program, you're going to use the program as it is to your advantage. So if other districts are using the current funding process that we have to their advantage, that's what they're going to do until we are going to, right? And I'm not saying I have the answer, but like, if we know that's an issue, then that's something we have to tackle head on, because it's not going to stop because some other district will decide, you know what, we've gotten enough from Hartford. Let's just change our ways. That's just never happened, right? If the oppressor doesn't stop oppressing until the oppressed steps up and speaks up.
So,
So, but the biggest issue is, guys, is state funding protocols. Like, we can say whatever we want here, but the fact that we fund education via property taxes is the biggest issue that we're gonna face.
I thought we were gonna get, that's a topic that's outside the room, but it's supposed to be tag on to this. One thing that we could ask at the state level is, when will they get to the 100% level of funding us? Because the person I got is the state still has an IOU for us. Like, districts like ours get more money because they know we have higher needs.
But even if they do, it will still not.
Still not.
I agree, but the first part is, at least we can at least ask, can we get the 100% of what you promised us? And the second thing I thought you said, I was listening in, and is, if we can find a way to 100% staff like special ed within our district, to really have a focus towards having a maximum amount of special ed in our district. Because I agree with you in that Bruce, that, I mean, in the current environment, a parent would be rational to send their child to another district, because those other districts have more capacity for special ed.
To serve.
And I would, in the current situation we have, it just would be maybe risky to think that Hartford can meet your child's needs until we resolve a couple of issues with shortages.
So it sounds to me like There might be state work that is maybe going to be done in the near future. Hopefully this will.
We're trying to advocate. I will tell you that the state special ed task force that I'm part of, like legislated to be part of. There's no conversation about special education and billing, like the task force does not want to engage in that conversation. And so I think we locally have to engage in our own advocacy. I mean,
It
there's
is a
this
statewide task force?
it's a statewide special education task force with a variety of stakeholders you can imagine, right? Parents, private facility providers, special education teachers. So we have other recommendations, but when several of us have wanted to talk about
Mhm.
the billing, the over identification potentially, it's really hard. Really hard to get there.
Why is that?
Different interests and, and we're supposed to have one set of, unified recommendations, and so.
Can we put like the special education funding as a separate agenda item for another day? Cause I feel like we all have a lot of things we want to say on this, and I think it'd be more productive if we did that. Not at this point, because I think it deserves a longer, more in-depth conversation, because we're not gonna get anywhere just doing this.
Agreed. I think it's worthy though, putting some kind of note what the topics are, what the issues are. I
But
think.
I think we need a separate, like an actual meeting where we talk about only that to give it the justice that it deserves,
With action items, okay?
I would agree. The way I would value it, Corey, is I don't think we blow a lot of time talking about issues. I think we can't fix it here. That is a whole separate meeting.
Right.
And so if we're gonna do it in that way, we may need different voices
Sure.
at the table to answer some stuff for us.
Okay.
Any more questions just on these financial statements outside of special ed? Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, Deputy Foster. Moving on to 1.02, update on the COVID-19 relief grants.
Yeah, I'll try to move through these next two quickly, because I do want to get to the 5-year forecast and speak, it's not exclusive to SPED, but it speaks to some of the issues we're discussing tonight. And so the COVID, this is, I think, celebration worthy. We have expended over $1 billion. So really the short version of it. At the end, as of the end of August, we had $30,900 of $154 million remaining. And that's at this point fully exhausted. In fact, we filed our final expenditure report for ARPS of 3, which had us spent to the penny. We've also drawn down all of that funding. If anybody goes to the state website and looks up our ESSER, it's going to say that it's at 0, because that's been an issue. And so one thing that I know the board has asked for, and is forthcoming, I don't have it done yet, is a detailed account of where our COVID relief dollars have been spent over the last few years. And so that's something we're working on putting together. But that's where we are. And there's been lots of things said about Hartford of late. And the one thing I'll say is we're fully expended on ESSER. And when we looked at the end of July, the average spend down in across Connecticut as a whole was 78% at a time when we were at 100%. So for all those things that have been said about Hartford, we spent it down faster than almost everybody else. That's the ESSER one, and then I've got the August report as well.
Yeah, let me ask a question. The heartburn with the state, so, is there a way to kind of put that in concise language, or is it gonna be addressed here? Because the impression that I've had is that are they asserting that there's money they found that was unspent? Is that what their assertion is?
Well, let me split it into two things. I'll speak to this when we get to the 5-year forecast as well, because the superintendent asked me to give an update on the state inquiries. And so I'll give an update on that as part of the update on the state inquiries. But I would say there's been two assertions. There's been an assertion of an overall not spending fully on grant funds in general. And I'll speak to that in a few minutes. I think as it relates to ESSER, back when we were adopting the FY, right, we did the hard work to adopt a fiscally balanced budget for FY25, which obviously was incredibly painful across the board. And then assertion was made after that budget was adopted that we had $60 million in ESSER we hadn't spent. Why'd you do all these cuts when you had 60 million you hadn't spent? What was happening in that case is, you know, you go out to the state website, for every district of the state on Ed site, they publish grant drawdowns.
Mhm.
So they publish, have you requested reimbursement on your grant? And at the time that that narrative was circulating, we had not requested reimbursement on 60 million in ARP ESSER 3 funding. And the reason for that is, you know, as the needs changed and evolved, right? How we were using the money changed and we had to go back and do a revision. You can't draw down until you submitted and had the revision approved. And so that happened in the month of July. And then we were able to process our drawdowns. And so there was essentially spending and drawdown were being conflated as though they were one and the same. And the reality is we had spent really when the state was saying that 60 million in ESSER was spent, we probably had 10 million left at that point that we hadn't spent. And they were saying, but we hadn't drawn it down. So you go to the website and it says, oh, look, it looks like you guys have $60 million available.
Yeah, but, okay, so I guess so. I guess from an oversight standpoint, so should we be looking at a grants management? Cause I know I've heard that story, and so what I'm asking is where the source of the problem was, cause I'm refusing to believe that the state's just dumb. So so did we miss
Not
that?
to comment on that.
Well,
There-
you can, I'm just wondering, I'm saying,
No,
so,
we're not
so,
commenting on that.
but I mean, I'm saying, so did we miss some kind of deadline or something? Where we need to have had something submitted by something?
I want to speak to that when we get to the.
Because there were
Yes.
areas in which
Yes.
we did not spend
Yes,
in the last 4 or 5 years,
there are improvements we.
but not 60
Okay,
million.
but the reason I'm asking is because I'm saying at the board level that I'm trying to up our game on some oversight stuff.
Yes.
And so, cause we spent months, for those in the room, like we spent months and months going over spending plans and stuff like that. What we did do as the school board per se is look at grants administration, how we do it and what our plans are. And so for this year, I just want to say that some of the functionaries of the district, maybe we should do some oversight of, because if that's where the source of the error is, then maybe we can improve there and not keep acting like we can, you know what I'm trying to say. Let's focus on the right area and not on this line item.
No, for sure. And I can speak to that when I give the update on the CSO.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll move on to 1.03 financial results update through August 2024, which is just 2 months into the fiscal year.
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna move quickly on this one. This is the August 24 financial report, and you know, for those who are new to the board, you know, our normal practice is at the finance committee each month, we bring the latest, you know, financial report through the most recent month for which we closed out the month. So this is through August of 24, first 2 months of the year. The first 2 months of the year are lowest spending months, right? It's July and August, mostly salaries for 12-month employees. You'll see a bunch of encumbrances for things like transportation, utilities, maintenance contracts, those kind of things. That's what generally shows up in July and August. Obviously, September is when it picks up because that's when we start paying 10-month employees. And so there's not a lot to say here that the expenditures are trending pretty similarly to where they were the last couple of years. The one thing I will flag for you is that really the next to last paragraph in your memo. We obviously are closely paying attention to the FY25 potential budget deficit. As you know, the FY25 budget included a $1 million budget task to sort of solve for during the year, which was $1 million less than our budget task from last fiscal year. But we also made 2 assumptions beyond, well, we made a vacancy assumption of about 5%. But we made 2 other assumptions. One was the use of 5 million in remaining ESSER ARP in the hopes that we would, you know, have some surplus after June 30th in ESSER that we could use. We don't, because the ESSER was exhausted by June 30th. That assumption's not valid. And then we also assumed the use of the 5.6 million in the non-lapsing fund to help balance FY25. We, as I shared with the earlier report, we're going to be meeting to ask the city council for about 3.7 of the non-lapsing fund to balance FY24. So that puts us in a not great situation as we start the year, because you know, those things combined bring us to between 9 and 10 million as a deficit as we are 2 months in, 3 months in to FY25. The vacancy issue, that's just, you know, is obviously what we absolutely don't want to see in every area, but it is obviously, we're going to accrue some additional savings because we're well above the 5% assumption at this moment. But obviously our work is to bring the vacancy number down over the course of the year. And so, you know, we're going to pay attention. One of the things I and the team will be doing is trying to identify, we have an account where we can use as a reserve And as we identify expenditures that don't have to happen, or we identify salary savings, we're gonna go ahead and sweep and pull money into that reserve account to try to pile up a surplus to address the deficit we know is already built in.
Is that something, Deputy Foster, that you can update us on kind of monthly, kind of where?
Yeah, I'll
we're-
give you a deficit updated report each month.
Okay,
And just make sure I'll try to keep it updated on the reserve as well. I mean, one of the things we're gonna do is start combing the budget and saying, I hate to say it this way, but is there stuff we know we need it, but can we do without it for the year, so we can start setting that money aside.
So one other thing, to the point about requesting access to the non-lapsing fund. Recommending that happen within the next board meeting, given that there are timeline implications on the city side as well.
yeah, so the timeline is we have to approve it as a board and the city council has to approve it at their meeting, which is a week later. So that's why we will bring it as a resolution, I assume.
Yes.
To the board proposal.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any of that? Okay. Moving along to 1.04, the 5 group.
So you're gonna do the CSD update first and then do the forecast.
Sure.
Okay. So I just want to give a high level what we know so far from the state's inquiries. And so as I think you know, they've been running 3 parallel inquiries. One is around our use of magnet grants. One is around special education, and one is around overall financial management practices. So we have the most insight in the third, the financial management practices. The special education review or inquiry has not moved very much. There's been, the state has engaged with a consultant. We've gone back and forth a little on the scope of work, but not a lot of that work has happened. And transparently, we'll say that when the superintendent requested the state look into special education, our specific ask was around these issue of cost structures. And it seems that the consultant they've engaged is really focused on programmatic pieces. So we've been engaged in some back and forth to try to make sure that speaks to the issues that, I mean, it's fine if it speaks to other things too, but we needed to speak to some of the financial realities that we talked about. The magnet inquiry, that's being done by the Office of Internal Audit with the state. They were on site, second week in September. They had a lot of meetings. We've given them access to significant amounts of data. We don't have much in the way of initial findings from them. So I don't have a lot I can say about what they're highlighting, what they're saying. And then the last is the financial management practices. So that's being done by a consulting group called Public Works. They were on site the third week in September. They had 10 or 12 focus groups in that week, had a number of interviews. I think you all met with them individually. And so the superintendent and I did get to sit with them at the end of that week, and they gave us a high level, here's some of the things we're seeing. And so we were able to have some good conversation about that. And what I would say is, I would say broadly, the feedback is there are systems and practices within finance that we can improve. And I think, I would agree with that, embrace that recommendation, right? They're going to come to us with specific suggestions about how we can do that. And so some of that is things they've heard from, for example, from principals or executive assistants around pain points, whether it's around purchasing, the timeliness of, how long does it take to get, to do purchasing, accounts payable processes. And these are things I think that were areas that we were already underway on, but it helps to have the additional kind of push. And so that's really, the largest thing is really around process. So system structures, process within finance. And then one area that to Board Member Walker's point, one area they highlighted is grants management practices. One of the challenges is one of the things they said to us was you need a grant manager. To which we said, absolutely, we had one. And over a series of successive years of budget cuts, and every time we cut budgets, we're trying to be as judicious as possible, not keeping cuts as far from schools as possible. And so there's been we can go back to previous org charts, and there's the grants manager, or there's the grants department. And so I think that's something we're working through. And actually, we did just post for a grant manager because we're attempting to be responsive to what we're hearing from the state inquiry. And I think it's, Board Member Walker, to your point, I think the goal for that position is really twofold. One is around systems and structures for grant management, and the monitoring that goes with that. So essentially having the annual grants calendar, right? This is when every grant we get, the application's gonna come out, this is when and the reports due, this is when some of them are internal, documents. When are we gonna draw down on each grant? Maybe those are some of the things that function would handle. Well, let me go ahead and speak to the question around the unspent funding. So we've been digging deep into that, because that is a concern, obviously. And what I can say is, and this is all, we wanted to be very transparent about this, so like, we've been looking at the publicly available data on that site, so nobody can say we're, playing funny numbers. We, over the last 4 fiscal years, that's 21, 22, 23, 24, our unspent grant dollars is about 6.7 million. So that sounds like a big number. I mean, it is a big number, but I just want to really emphasize the fact that what that represents is that over the last 4 fiscal years, we spent 98.6% of our grant dollars. So that 6.7 million is 1.4%. That's spread across 113 grants. So one of the other things that's a reality in Hartford is we have more grants than any district in the state by a lot. And so, you think about, and you could say, well, we've been about a grants manager all along. I don't think we disagree. I just think we've been, we can't simultaneously want to keep our cuts to central office and then maintain everything like a position like a grants manager. And so I think that's been the struggle. So just to give you a little more context, so 6.7 million, that's spread across 113 grants over 4 years. And so in particular, about half of that, 6.7 is 4 magnet grants. 2 in 21, 1 in 23, 1 in 24. That counts for about half of the 6.7 million. That funding was academic and social support grants and extracurricular expansion grants for magnet schools. And so what I can say about those is there's multiple things in play. So I want to be really honest and say, I'm saying to you, we need to improve our grants management processes, right? That's feedback we're getting from Public Works. I'm sure whenever they release their report, that's one of the things they're going to say. But there are also challenges in the system. So I'll use the 2021 magnet grants as an example. These were 2 magnet grants, one for extracurricular expansion, one for academic and social support. The grant application opened in EGMS, which is the state grant management system, on May the 14th. We submitted our applications on May the 25th, and we were supposed to spend every penny by June 30th. So we had 6 weeks from the time the grant opened in EGMS. And so that's gotten
The summer
better.
of 2021.
Right,
Just
right.
think about the summer of 2021 was.
So, and I won't say that, I mean, I love hearing when I say there are things we need to improve about system, like I'm not denying that by any stretch. But I also want to acknowledge the ways in which that's a challenge. The state's gotten better. So the 2 magnet grants in 23 and 24 that didn't get fully expended, we had longer time horizons. We did not have a full year. One started in December, meaning it became available in December. So just to highlight the struggle with the reasons magnet grants they're showing up as the unspent funds is because these are magnet grants for specific purposes in magnet schools like extracurricular expansion. The way they work operationally is we get an allocation for every magnet school, but it's bundled as one grant. And so the work we do after the grant opens up is we work with every school leader. The school leaders are defining, what is the work they want to do in their building with that grant fund. We can't submit the grant until we have a fully, vetted and adopted budget for each individual school. So it's not like we can submit the grant for school A, they can go ahead and start spending. Nobody can start spending until we've submitted for everybody. And again, this is all stuff we can improve on, right? But, I'll give an example of the magnet grant from last year that we did not fully expend. We had a couple schools that really struggled. And the other thing we do, by the way, is before we submit a grant to the state, we go back and forth and say, hey, we'd like to do this. What do you think? Sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they say no. We had a couple schools in particular last year who went back and forth with the state a couple times because the stuff they initially wanted to do with funding was not approved. The state said no. And so what ended up happening, we had, I have all the emails, right? The other magnet schools say, where's my money? Where's my money? I want to spend my money. And we were stuck in this process of trying to get to the final yes for these other 2 schools before we could start spending. So I just, again, not attempting to make excuses, right? But I want to be clear, like Public Works is going to say that we have opportunities for improvement in our fiscal management practices, in particular our grants management practices. But as I dive in, the reason I'm saying this before the financial forecast, because as we dive into the 5-year financial forecast, like this is one of those classic cases of 2 things can be true at the same time. And it is absolutely true that we have opportunities to improve our financial management practices. It is also absolutely true that the structural financial problem we face has nothing to do with not spending grant funds. right? Because if you take that 6.7 million and you put it over the 4 years, right? A little more than 1.5 million in each year, right? We cut 387 positions and $60 million in last year's budget. Like that unspent grant money is not the answer. And I'm sharing that with you as a board because I think there is a risk. I don't think Public Works necessarily is going to say that, right? Because the state had a purpose behind kind of launching some of their inquiries, right? And there's, I don't think people want to hear that Hartford is underfunded. And so if it was possible to push back and say, well, your financial management practices are bad, it's not really that you don't have enough money. And I just want to be really clear, like when we look at this, yes, we have unspent grant funds. Yes, we need to tighten that up. The other thing I'll say to you is that 98.6% spent over the last 4 years, that's about 0.1% less than the spend across all districts in Connecticut and the spend across other opportunity districts. Meaning our spending pattern on our grants is about the same as every other district in Connecticut, which I'm happy to share that data.
And we are gonna unpack for similar for the systems to see how they track.
You're gonna have that, you're gonna provide it for that. I'm taking some notes, but I appreciate what you said. That was a good report out. Because one of the things that I'm gonna be advocating more and more for is about responsiveness of leadership. I think there's a sense that, of course, we got challenges. I think where with the risk we have that we're confronting in several different areas is a sense that leadership hasn't been responsive, or somehow an issue just has been kind of sitting out there that needs to be dealt with. And so this at least feels like you got your arms around that, there's a way forward. And that's really the best that can be expected, that's what you're doing.
Context matters as well, right? I mean, we got $144 million to spend within, I don't know what, 3 years, 2.5 years? Well, yeah, all of it. And which we have to think about, right? The churn for us in CFOs. Overlay that with having to reduce over the years, and where do we cut? Right, when we hear central office is top heavy, yes, and so lots of reflection for us. And looking to you all as a board, right, also to help inform our thinking relative to how do we have strong systems, processes, and procedures. What's the right balance of oversight, right, rightly so. And then what's the financial implication at the end of the day for us to be able to carry out, having, be in the district with the largest number of grants, while staying true to the limited finances that we have, right? So all of
This is a good discussion.
all of those things.
Yes.
Well, I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead first.
I was gonna say, well, the way I would wrap up that, summarize, right, is you're gonna hear, right, there's gonna be a report at some point from Public Works. It's gonna talk a lot about lots of areas for improvement, right? And, we're gonna lean on them. The state's paying the bill. And so, they've started making as-is flowcharts for us, right? Let's, map out every single process we have in finance, identify places where they could be more efficient, like, well, we're not averse to taking the help. So what you're gonna hear from them is you're gonna hear, there's lots of opportunities for systems and process improvement, and we're gonna take it. We're gonna take that feedback and we're gonna work on it. What you're not gonna hear from them is there's a pile of money sitting somewhere that would fix our problem.
Nor are you gonna hear anything relative to special education, because there was very little, if any, unless they asked you all, but they didn't ask us, around the special education challenges. Which is, right, the minute I began to kind of feel that that's where it was going, right, I tried to lean in on the other inquiry to see if, right, we can get some support to lift.
Is the special Blue Ribbon Commission going to be addressing?
So that's another avenue that I'm hoping that we can leverage. We did have what I thought was a very productive meeting, and I will say that publicly tomorrow when I present to the Blue Ribbon Commission. With some of their co-chairs. And so I'm hopeful that that could be another voice for us around this.
So one just follow on this one. So can we get some kind of write from you or from city people on this bid and magnet inquiry? Because when they interviewed me, they mentioned that, and so I know those are separate things. And so
Who interviewed you? Public Works? Or-
yes, public works, and it was mentioned that, oh, this may be coming. And that it didn't involve us is fine, but, I mean, I don't think,
I'm sorry, that what might be coming, that the other inquiries might be coming?
yes.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah, we're waiting to hear,
okay, 'cause I've come here,
the ultimate,
We have-
write-up for
That's
the
on-
special education piece. It was really
Okay.
focused on
Professional.
professional learning, and while we find we will take professional learning, that's not it. So
well, that's all I'm
Went back.
seeing, I was just saying,
Yeah, I
that's
had
what the
to go
write-up
back
is,
several
but that's
times.
all it is, I kind
I
of want to
did
see a little
get
bit more
a
meat
team,
and potatoes.
update you on this, but I did get a follow-up from the deputy commissioner. That my requests were gonna be addressed in the scope of work. So I'm just waiting for the scope of work to come back. I don't know if it will entail interviewing the board.
Oh, they haven't even started, yeah. they haven't-
No.
Okay, so that's
Nothing
not
yet.
even, okay, so it's still,
Yeah, I think that's the one that's
way-
gonna be furthest out, but all of them are supposed to be completed by December.
okay, so. it
This way,
needs to
that
be moved.
I still
Which
heard.
seems reasonable. I mean, well, how long you gonna pay a consultant? I mean, that's all,
Oh,
it's all
they're
leaves that
sorry.
way.
Contract with Public Works for the entire year.
So we're
Oh.
gonna get technical
Okay.
assistance,
Okay,
two days a week, I'm not sure. I think 2 days a month or a day a week
that'd be good.
or through, yes, so we're gonna take all of it.
Mhm.
I just wanted to mention one more thing that, so just to give a little more insight into the Magnum increase, so I mentioned that's the Office of Internal Audit, and I think, you know, what they're very focused on, how are you using the Magnum money? And are you compliant? And I think, there's not gonna be a, you know, we're not compliant or we're not using it in compliance. I think they're gonna have some thoughts about how we use our Magnet money. You know, I think at one point in one of the conversations, they said, well, do you spend Magnet grants on non-Magnet schools? Like, no, not in a million years, right? Like, but that was a trajectory where they were headed. But what I will say is one of the things you may hear, and this is me just, you know, what may come from this is they're gonna push on the equity-based starter budget that we use. They're gonna push back on the ways that we're trying to equitably fund across the neighborhood and Magnet schools. Because I think the lens that we've heard from them is that you should, you know, your general fund should be equitably distributed across all your schools. And then Magnets should get all of that grant money on top of that. And so that may be something that they come back with, but I want to be really clear, like, and I was going to talk about this a little bit with the financial forecast. Our general budget is about 284 million. For the most part, we can't use general funds for tuition, transportation, and utilities. And if I take transportation, tuition, utilities out of our general fund, those three things are 52% of our general fund. Like the idea that we're gonna use 48% of our general fund, and that's gonna be our baseline funding for all of our schools, and then Magnets get all the Magnet funding, like it's. Our schools would not run.
It's just also not how grants work, like, we're supposed to use the grants and then. Like, make up the difference, like, you're generally supposed to like, use this on grant funding. And then the money you're not using on that stuff on the general fund is supposed to then be increased, like,
I think they would say that we're supposed to
they're not.
allocate funding to our
opportunity costs.
schools. Well, I think they would say we're supposed to use all our funding on to sort of fund the baseline for our schools. And then we're supposed to use grants for sort of strategic investments over and above. And that's just isn't, when 58% of our general fund goes to tuition, transportation, and utilities, it's just not our reality.
We are
very-
49% taxable, we're just not making that much.
But at one point, there was, in another world, pre-me and many of us, I think there was some type of funding structure that worked that way. And over the years, given the challenges with budgets, right, a board made a decision when we identified the inequities in funding Magnets and neighborhood schools, and there was a charge to develop a more equitable budget process and budget formula. And so we did, right, in partnership with the board and the community. And, you know, here we are. Now, it might be interpreted as, right, that's not what the Magnet funds were intended to be.
Can you speak more specifically about the equitable formula that you use to fund the schools? So I take it to mean that you're not doing a proportional allotment of funds to school based on their student body, right? You're trying to be equitable, not be proportional or equal, in other words, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, we have the starter budget where all schools get the same allocation for example, everyone has a principal, everyone has an assistant principal based on a certain amount. And so after that, we have additional layers, right? Depending on the chronic absenteeism rate of the school, you get additional supports based on the multilingual learners you have, right? That's the equity, piece to it. That the state Resco office or whoever agrees with that. Now, I can't tell. I mean, we've had that for several years now.
And these are all grants, so just to clarify, the $6.7 million, these are all grants from the state. These are not like the philanthropic grants, that's all grants from the state that are not, that we're talking about.
It's state and federal.
It's state and
They
federal
all come
grant.
through this, they come through the state, but state and federal grants.
State and federal grants, okay, and these are all then, within that category, these are all essentially restricted funds. They're not general fund, you can spend any way you want, they're restricted to a specific use.
To a degree, I mean, some of our funds, so Magnet Operating Grant is a big one, our Alliance Grant is a big one. We have to submit grant applications, we have to say how we're gonna use it, but you can pretty much use it on anything. As long as, but you're still submitting an application. That's the other thing to keep in mind, because, we don't know what the state's gonna say on the Magnet Grant, but as we've gotten all these questions about our use of grant funds, one of the things we've tried to remind is that we submit an application for every one of these, the state approves it. And then we submit an expenditure report at the end of the year that says how we spent it, and they approve that too. So, for us, there's been a little bit of, not sure what they're expecting to find, because they approved it all. Okay, Christina was giving me the finger. Well, not that big.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good job.
so moving into the 5-year forecast, so we can go ahead, Christine. So this is something, obviously is an important part of our fiscal practice, and so I'm not gonna read all the caveats to you, and I think you have the slides, but, we put together the 5-year forecast and just think about, okay, what do we need to plan for, and what do we need to anticipate? I will say this is a very conservative forecast, and what I mean when I say this conservative forecast, it's not gonna be better than this.
This is the best case scenario.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say that before I get into it. So if we go ahead to the next slide, we start with our enrollment, right? And so in your slides, just to orient you, right? I've got an assumption slide and then a graph for, enrollment, revenue, expenses, right? And so we are, for a lot of this, just to explain it for all of them, we're just taking a weighted average of the last 10 years to project forward. And when I say weighted average, right, we're giving the most weight to the last 3 years, next most weight to the last 5, the least weight to sort of the aggregate across the last 10. And so what that translates to for us on enrollment is 2.3% per year. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see what that looks like. And so this is, projection of enrollment. You see our 24-25 is about 16,500. With this projection, we're around 14,680 by FY 30 or by the 29-30 school year. That's with 2.3% per year. The one thing I will say, you'll notice that 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24. Sorry, I should have said 23, 24, 25 are relatively flat. We don't know yet. It is just too soon to know, right? Our enrollment decline tapered off in the last 3 years. We don't know if that's pandemic and the decline is going to continue, or if that's a persistent trend. So that's why we went ahead and said, look, let's assume the 2.3% decline. But if that wasn't pandemic related and there's something else going on that's causing our enrollment to level off, this projection will be off in terms of enrollment. So if we go to the next one.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Is this because we're expecting this many more kids to go out of the districts, or there's just not that many kids within
Both.
Hartford?
So
Okay.
Hartford's,
I mean, Hartford population has been decreasing for the last 10 years to begin with.
yeah, so it's both.
Okay.
So on revenue, we're essentially assuming largely flat revenue. There's a couple exceptions to that over the next 5 years. And actually, just last week, the city presented their 5-year budget to the MARB, and they projected no increase in contributions to the board over the next 5 years. And so the one thing I think, Board Member Walker, you asked about the state fully funding. And so they did the acceleration of the full funding of ECS. FY 26 is the final year of that acceleration. So next year's budget will be the final year of the increase in ECS. You're not going to see it in our general fund graph. There's a reason for that. So our ECS over a certain dollar amount is the Alliance grant. So the Alliance grant is not actually additional funding, it's just a chunk of our ECS that's carved out as a grant. And so whenever we get more ECS, it shows up in our grants, it doesn't show up in our general fund. Sounds weird, and it took me a while to wrap my head around that.
Why is that?
I think, well, several years ago, I should have the actual year, I don't have the actual year. Legislation was passed, and Alliance districts are the lowest performing districts in the state. And so if you're an Alliance, what this legislation said is if you're an Alliance district, they just picked a year. They said after this fixed year in time, any additional ECS you get comes as a grant. And I mean, probably so the state has more oversight in Alliance districts. I think it's a mechanism to have some oversight and control by having a grant that they have to approve each year. So, we have to submit an Alliance grant. It's actually a grant application for part of our entitlement funding under ECS. So again, City of Hartford's contribution will remain level. The only changes on federal and state grants, we're projecting modest declines in our magnet operating grant, given our enrollment declines, our magnet enrollment slides. We aren't really projecting big other increases or changes in our grants. It's modest, maybe 2 million over the 5 years increasing in federal. After the November election, all bets could be off depending on how that goes. We are projecting increases in private grants, and that's reflected. The superintendent was talking about wanting to increase our effort to bring in philanthropic dollars, and so we're building that into the forecast. Okay, so if we go to the next, you'll be able to see. This is what that revenue looks like. So everything I just said in terms of assumptions, right? You see at the bottom, that's our the blue and the orange, right? That's our general fund. It's our ECS plus our City of Hartford. You see that's pretty flat, all going all the way back to 2014. And then I've broken out the Alliance grant and the magnet operating grant because those are large dollar figures. And then you can see the other state grants, the federal grants, and the private billing. On the next slide, this is just a table, so this really just restates what's in the graph. Okay, so expenditure assumptions. This is where when I say it's a conservative projection, right? We again, for most of these, did weighted averages. So we looked at what has our spending trend been on a lot of these things. And so for a lot of these, we used a weighted average. But the reason this is conservative is because across all spending categories, we're projecting less than 2% growth annually, except tuition and transportation. So what you can see is if we use that weighted average, tuition is going to go up 7.7% per year for the next 5 years. Transportation is going to go up 4.2% per year for the next 5 years. We're projecting everything else essentially stays pretty flat. So, the example I'll give you is, and actually, I think if you go to the next slide, I think I might have them. Yeah. So here's some of those projected annual changes, and you can see on the right kind of how we came up with them. So like for some things, right, instructional improvements, advertising, library books, legal judgments, we're just projecting no increase. We're just going to have the exact same money in 2030 that we have now for those things. For the things up above, you can see again, the 7.7% for tuition, 4.2% for transportation, even utilities, we're not projecting a greater than 2% growth. And that's something we actually could get from, a vendor who works with the city who provides us with the utility projections. And you can see here salaries, 1.1% for certified, 1.3% not. That's obviously incredibly conservative. We're in the middle of contract negotiations, and we know we got to move salaries. That's an imperative, right? With our vacancy rate, we know that. But this is the challenge, right? Because we know we need to increase it. And so keep in mind, right, we're also projecting enrollment decline. So when I say 1.1% salaries for certified, in a context where we're projecting enrollment to drop by close to 2,000 students over the next 5 years. And so we may need fewer positions overall, and obviously the right sizing of the district conversation could play in. But that's where the current expenditure projections come from. So if we go to the next slide.
Sorry, can I ask another quick question on that slide? The 4.2% increase in transportation, is that due to special ed transport, like special type of transportation, not just like regular?
Well, I mean, it's the aggregate because we just use the weighted average. So it's the aggregate growth in transportation. But when you look at our transportation for FY25 is almost 30 million. Only 5 million of that is general ed big buses. So the vast majority of our transportation is special education. So then this is the expenditure forecast, right? Unfortunately, what you see is the bars behave differently on this one than the revenue graphs. And we're projecting, even with those conservative assumptions I gave you, this is what it looks like. But what I mostly want you to see is the only bars that are getting bigger are tuition and transportation. right? Like those are the, when you look at the increase over the next 5 years, that's what's driving it. And so if we go to the next slide. This is again, just giving you dollar figures, right? You see, the vast majority, apart from tuition, the vast majority of our budget is in salary and fringe benefits. So if we go to the next. Lastly, we made some assumptions about deficit mitigation. And so we made an assumption that, we did a 5% vacancy assumption in FY 25. For this projection, we're saying a 4% vacancy assumption starting in FY 26 and going forward. We do, the legislature did pass the elimination of general ed tuition from FY 26 forward, so that's built into our mitigation assumption. And we also projected that use the non-lapsing fund in 24 and 25. We want to have that available after FY 25. And so we're actually there, yes, after 25. So if we go to the next slide, this is what the deficits look like. So for FY 26, if we assume a 4% vacancy assumption, and if the legislature maintains getting rid of general ed tuition entirely, starting in FY 26, we would be at an $8.2 million deficit. And it goes to 21, 36, 50, 66, obviously 5 years out, right? Things are going to change a lot in the next 5 years. But again, this is the conservative assumption about where we're going to land over the next 5 years relative to our deficit. And I think if we go to one more slide, this is more the conversation, right? Like what are the strategies? We already talked a little about the right sizing. And obviously, if there's legislative advocacy work around funding and or around SHEF and the SHEF agreements, and certainly opportunities to increase revenue. And I already talked about it. I think what we projected is our private funding is about 6.6 million now. We projected trying to get to like 8.25 million by FY 30. So that's a modest increase, but as a percentage, it's a big bump in what our private dollars are. The only other thing, I don't have a slide for this, and I think, see, that's the last slide.
There's an appendix.
Yeah, if you want to see it, so this gives you, if you look at the financial reports from tonight, this gives you the projected expenditures across all the categories in the financial reports. So if you wanted to go into more detail about where we're seeing, those increases happening. The per pupil conversation earlier, I just wanted to speak to that for 1 second. Because one of the things I've been looking at really in light of the state inquiries, because of this push around, magnets should be, or grants should be for the extras and your general fund should be for the basics. I just want to highlight that, again, our 52% of our general fund is consumed by tuition, transportation, and utilities. Based on this projection, that'll be 64% of our general fund by 2030, right? So we'll be down to having a little more than a third of our general fund for use actually in our schools by 2030. I just want to put that in per pupil terms, even with the projected enrollment decline. So for FY 25, our per pupil general fund dollars after you back out tuition, transportation, utilities is $8,200, $8,250 is what we have per student in general fund dollars after we've paid for tuition, transportation, utilities. By FY 30, that number's $6,900. So we have fewer dollars per student, even with the enrollment decline in terms of general fund dollars after you back out tuition, transportation, utilities. And I can tell you that even if you look at all funds based on that projection, right now our per pupil is around 17,000 after, again, back out tuition, transportation, utilities. FY 30, that's going to be about 16,600. The total dollars we have to spend per student actually in our school system after we paid for the transportation, tuition, utilities.
So anyway, so now I'm kind of, with two things you said. It's gone from 8 to 6. That's the money coming out of the budget towards per pupil. Then how do you get to $17,000? Is that that's not putting transportation and salary back in it, or are you?
No, sorry. The 8,000 was general fund dollars
So
per student, and then the 17 is all funds. But both of them back out tuition, transportation, utilities.
That's what I thought. Okay, so more than half from grants or.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I share that because given we don't, given that there is going to be, we don't know exactly what the state's going to say when they come back with their inquiries. We just want to be clear that the notion that we would run our schools on $6,900 per student and then use all the grants as for strategic extras.
Right.
Just it's not real.
Right, not real.
Also just a great way for everybody to hate magnet schools, like, it's just not ideal if we fund all of our money in magnet schools and then laugh at Hartford High for not having as much funding, that's just stupid.
So Corey's up, right,
It's probably not the way you would say it.
no, exactly, so, I mean, Corey's point gets at the question that I've gotten, at least from your concerned citizen types, right? And it's two, one is, people who figure it out, once you kind of see it, is, Chef, when can Chef end? When can we rethink the magnet school thing? Because most people who live in Hartford figured out that that doesn't work. And the third part is transportation. Everyone just, that's, that one I think is the one that feels like it needs the most, because I think people get is transportation doesn't help the local students who go to school in Hartford. They get that somehow that money is going to a mission that you get one of them. And I guess one of the observations too, this maybe gets to what you were saying, Brody, like the one thing I figured out is like, I'm not figured out a school like Hartford, the percentage of state funding that makes up our budget is a big chunk. In some wealthy district, the amount of money, state funding that makes up that school budget is relatively small, right? So to them, to a certain degree, this is almost like monopoly money, because they aren't really looking at the state funding as their way to pay for that schooling. So I agree with you, there's something about, so they have a whole different reality. It's to a certain degree, it doesn't matter to being capital water because they have local funds or revenues to really pay for their education, and we don't. So we've had conversations in the last couple of years about these different funding models, these legislation things we can. I've got a little confused as to what's we're backing there. Is there an actual legislative plan that would save us from this? Like there, supposedly there's legislative plans that separate funding from property taxes or somehow will make need more the driver. But according to what you're saying, need the current,
Like what's actually in process right now.
yeah, in terms of, because this obviously is not
Solving
sustainable.
Financial problem.
There's a push to increase the reimbursement, right, for special education. That's a little separate than this, but that would be additional funding coming in. There is push, although I don't think it's strong, to take the tuition piece, the burden
I've heard that too. I mean,
from
away from us.
from the district. I think that's further away unless there's something else that's special for Hartford, given that Hartford has a unique choice system. I think it'd be very hard to get that across the state in the next, legislative session, but
Right.
I mean, Hartford is not
Okay,
like all the others.
so let me tag you on that one. That's the challenge we have is, so for that to happen, all our friends in other districts would have to kind of come to our rescue and say, let's vote for this thing from Hartford. That's the thing that doesn't happen in
So what
Connecticut.
friends are you talking about?
Well.
I hear what you're
well,
saying.
No,
No, I got you.
No, well-
You fucking do it.
well, but here's what I'm saying, but they should, because it's.
Agreed.
Because there's a way in
We have
which, that the state can't, to me, can't reconcile most achievement, highest educated people, but biggest gap in education. Like you just can't, it almost, that storyline is, we have really processed great people, but they're stingy. I mean, that's the way it comes across.
So that's the point of Connecticut though, like we just had a Gilmore Girls Fest on Pratt Street, like if that doesn't give you like.
I got it.
The discrepancy problem
Yeah.
that Connecticut has, what does?
Well, I guess I'm saying there's an argument around sustainability.
Agreed, no, but I
At
think
some
that's the
point-
thing is we can't really. Funding education via property taxes is dumb, specifically because we are only 49% taxable. Like that's the biggest issue that we're always gonna have, and even if looking at this. the real answer is we have to increase our revenue if we ever want to spend more on anything.
Well, that's what I'm saying, so,
Because cutting expenditures isn't an option, because
no,
our people deserve better, so the only answer is increasing our revenue. And highlighting those, I mean, like, maybe
So-
we can spend less on utilities if we put solar panels on every school, like.
you can't cut. So
I
what
mean,
you
I'm
just
being
said,
slightly facetious there.
well, what I'm saying, based on what you said, then rational people would then vote for the increase to the superintendent points just for Hartford. Just for Hartford. It's
Yeah, but
not-
they gave us shit when the state absorbed our debt during the. March
I got your
process,
point, I'm just saying. Not trying to make this go round and round, but. If we're gonna, there's no reason for us to make that argument to anybody if they're not gonna take it and say, okay, let's fix it. Cause what you're saying is we'll make that argument and people just shrug and say, but we're not gonna fix it.
Right.
Because what. Deputy Foster is saying is their comeback is, Harvard will just waste the money.
Right.
So, well, that's part of what I think you're trying to prove about us is like, no, money's not really being wasted. We're kind of spending every dime, it just. It is
We're in
what
a
it
limited
is.
situation, systemically, we do not have a good program, like, the way in which we are funding is systemically not good for Harvard.
Well. But the one thing I'm interested in that we can, I think, impact is helping, I think with Debbie Foster. Let's show up all our areas to at least show that we're gonna be adequate in every area.
And we're
Like
doing everything we can.
Right,
in hopes that they
like,
take
to
pity on
me,
us.
grant, that's why. Dean grants management, I said, I know we're gonna get dinged on that because. It's just an obvious thing to say, and there's maybe a couple other things we can, CFO or something. After we got all that stuff handled, then I think we can maybe make the argument again that,
We're doing everything we can.
and, yeah.
Do we have an
Does-
in-kind?
Sorry, I have my hand up.
Sorry.
Does the district have a person at like the central office level who's like a clear policy person who can do the advocacy and be that voice, that there is a clear go-to person who can, in a concise, relatable way, point out some of these issues and be at the legislative session when legislature is in session and do that type of advocacy?
We're hiring someone.
Okay.
This is not a new position. I wanna clear, we're merging the director of communications. We had Jesse Sugarman, that was kind of taking, that role on, so we're comms and, legislative liaison, so we're hoping to get someone. In the meantime, we do have our lobbyist, that supports, but I do believe that, maybe from an offset of the policy committee or another, I'd hate to suggest another, body of the board, but I think we do need a, legislative task force of Harvard Public Schools, that it's not just, it's that person that you're talking about, Ruth, and a group.
I mean, this sort of strikes me as, I've heard about, literacy, financial literacy for, people who are low income, where really what they need is a living wage. Right? Like you can teach all the financial literacy you want. If you don't have a living wage, you're not gonna pay your bills and do all the things you need to do, right? So we can talk about all the ways to better manage the money that we have in Hartford and do all these things to cut pennies here and there, not thousands in our case. But if we're fundamentally under-resourced and underfunded, we're just playing with scarcity and we're never going to address all of the need that there is in Hartford. So I think, right, it's because it's such a flawed system, we need to have a voice in that,
And
in
it's,
the room where these decisions, those policies are being created.
I also don't think that it's just one thing. Right, we look at that list and chef agreement, that's not even us.
Well.
That's not even Harvard Public Schools. I mean, those are our partners at the city, but it really isn't us. So
Yeah.
how do we go at that?
Hand up on that, I don't know who to give this to, but. I get asked that question, I thought it was gonna end, but now I think it isn't, and so.
Which
Who
one?
could, Chef, I keep asking that question, when is Chef gonna end? Cause it.
The last,
I think my understanding of that is when everything is equal.
the last
No,
agreement
it's making
was
everything
supposed to end,
unequal.
Lori, correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
but
wrong,
The stated goal
Right,
is-
go ahead, so.
supposed to end. We're in year what, 4 of 10.
So it's
Year
supposed to
4
actually end.
And at any time, right, someone can say, any of the parties can say, nope, you gotta go back.
And then the clock can be reset, you're saying.
Sure.
Okay, does that,
So I think for the policy committee, we should probably have a chef session where we do a dive deep and better understand that.
I would agree.
I mean, part of being strategic is like we have to try to figure out what are the factors that are outside of our control, but we can influence in some way. And there are some things, you know, like chef is probably going to be the least likely for us to influence, right? Because it's the nature of judicial decisions and the court making decisions about taking economy and finance, all of that into account, but the things that we could influence, I think that's where we really have to do that, because that's where we get the best yield in our efforts.
Steve, let's
Yeah.
let Stephen go.
And yeah, very much building off your point, Ruth. I think we're at a time where the opportunity for some of that advocacy work is greater than it has been. For a number of reasons, not least of which is that the public is activated and folks are organizing around these issues in a way that would be required to put the kind of political pressure on representatives to pass any kind of legislation. You know, the next item on the agenda is related to that, like, I think that I appreciate your question because about, like, is there someone who kind of owns that legislative advocacy
right.
work? Because I think that this board will play a critical role in doing a lot of that work and informing the public about what the issues really are, because it's so complicated. Like, I think we as a board can wrap our heads around and identify some of those things. And through the tools that we do have available, even if it's just passing resolutions at this point, inform the public and create the narrative and the sort of targets for policy at the state level that we want to hit. I think the time is right for that, and it'll take a lot of legwork. First of all, just figure out what you can target, but then yeah, organizing people around it, because as Tyrone was saying, like the narrative is in our favor, right? Like we can make the state look pretty bad and negligent of its children in ways that, especially post 2020 and, you know, all of the mainstreamization of social justice, like discourse. There's a lot of momentum in that direction. So I think that we can carve out some of that work for ourselves.
I think that's probably a discussion for the policy committee. All of this feels like a discussion at the next policy committee meeting.
Including the building of their right sizing schools, and I know I said that at the family and community engagement committee, I'm saying it here as well. The recommendation for the policy committee and all committees that have an interdependency to explore the school right sizing, consolidation, closure, and all the others that kind of fall under that. There's a lot of conversation in the community now, like everywhere I go, right? That's the question. Well, when are you closing schools? And so I just think it's, to your point around educating community, and like it's not as easy as it sounds, and there are processes, there are policies that require deep engagement and you know, maintaining the integrity of engaging and doing this in partnership with community. So I think it's just an opportunity for a step back
yeah,
to look at the policy and.
yeah, I just want to give homework assignment. I think I'm gonna focus on what Stephen is saying. I do feel like there's the possibility to build some broader coalition around the chef question and people who want to help address it. I just want to know, can we give that as part of the homework of the job description for whomever gets hired? Cause I'm just gonna tell you that our policy committee won't be enough. I think we kind of need somebody whose day job is to help, what I'm thinking about, is when we were doing that whole Access Health CT thing, and people had little groups in all adult town, they were working. Groups, across lots of towns, I think there are people who get that the chef thing is a bit of a problem, but you need somebody who can help, like community organize all of these people, and I'm just tossing out there, is it possible that that person could help us like coordinate that a little bit and get legs, we can get to go to the Capitol with us, and you get what I'm getting at.
Yeah, Lori, I know that we're way out of time and at some
Yeah,
point, and I'm only saying Lori because like you represent the city and like we're not a party and please like. I feel like this is like some deja vu for me, honestly, being fully transparent. How many times I've had this conversation with the board, with a board and feeling like hitting the wall because like we're not a party and we can do all the galvanizing and organizing we want, but there's the state, there are the plaintiffs and there are the city. And so help, don't answer now. And I'm not saying we don't do what you're saying. Totally. Every year I've been like, yes, let's figure this out. And I'm also not saying to do away with Shaq. I want to be clear. That is not what I'm saying. Because I don't know that is the answer either.
Right.
I'm just saying exploring and then trying to address the structures, financial structures, who's responsible for meeting the needs of students, the system itself.
Yeah.
So I just
yeah.
wanted to,
So
it makes me very nervous.
we're
that-
talking about a coalition, because if it's just us asking, it'll go nowhere. It can't just be us.
And
It
even
has
if
to be
there's a
some broader.
coalition, I know Tyra, but even if there's a coalition,
It's
like
still not good enough.
this is, I mean,
Okay.
a
Alright.
court decided. Sorry, Ruth? I'm telling
Right.
channeling you,
Area.
channeling you, Ruth.
But it is, yeah, it's, the judicial branch doesn't have to take account the economy of its decisions. It issues its rules and expects it to be carried, so.
Then topic 2 quickly is bullet number 1. I'm struggling with now because I've said it, and here's the question. All the action I need is, can we figure out the real cost savings out of that? Because a lot of times it makes sense to people, and it always makes sense to people, but as I looked at it, I can't always find real cost savings out of it. And so I don't want people trapped in that fool's gold that
I will
somehow
tell you,
we
we did
cost
it.
the school,
did it
we're gonna
already.
have all this extra money. Because when I did the little, on my calculator, I didn't see the.
We did it once,
You
right?
need a spreadsheet at least.
Close
I mean, right.
We closed schools for 3 years.
And I know, but I was in the community,
$11
there was a
million.
lot of fight against that, closing the school.
I'm not minimizing it, but $11 million is $11 million. But when we
Okay,
think
take
about
that.
financial sustainability, right, longer term, that is also not the answer. It's partially the answer, but it's not the entire thing. And so, right, $11 million over 3 years. We don't have facilities
That's
upstate.
something.
So it is something, but it also doesn't get, $30 to $60 million.
I have a quick question. I know we probably want to end it soon. Do we have a list or like a dollar amount of like in-kind services that we get from like other entities, like the services that we get that we don't have to pay for? Because Jen might kick me on the table, but like Trinity College only gives the city $25,000 a year in pilot taxes, and like that's ridiculous. If we can get more of these nonprofits or hospitals or large entities to give the city more money and then be like, hi, we need that for education.
You're in the treasurer's office.
That's what you. Keep that in mind. The treasurer doesn't do that, that's why.
Okay.
But like, I don't wanna like start going out saying, all of these people should be giving us this money if they're helping the district in other ways, you know? Like, I'm still gonna complain about Trinity College specifically because that's ridiculous, tuition $75,000 a year, but. Other entities that I don't wanna necessarily annoy. Feel like we should bother them too. Yeah,
And I hope that we could, like we said a few things, but some of these are so heavy, even though like the first bullet, that is so heavy and
Be careful, you're gonna share that publicly.
It's just,
Yeah, but it's real.
It's I don't know, the 350, like.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to. That's how it's just, but to channel what Stephen's saying, people in the community are bringing this up, like people understand that there's a lot of schools with little population in it. Now, here's the selling point that we can't always get, but the dream I would have is if you could combine schools, if people get all their services, like if I could combine
but
schools.
communities are not
and-
trying to hear that. That's what I'm saying, it's fight. I think I might be the only board member left that voted on, you make people used to do, not speak to me to this day. Who voted for that plan. It got real, no matter what you said, if you say the worst condition a school could be in is a 5. One of the schools we closed was a 4, but they still wanted to be in that school.
Well, MLK was a 5.
Yes,
Right.
but that got closed
And it
and
got-
it's not open today, so
True.
this is not light at all. This is very personal. People crying and it was, I've never been through anything, cause we had to travel around the city and hear it. Over here, it was like, it was so bad. Because this is, everybody's attached to a school for a
Sure.
personal story, a reason when they were going through something in their life and my child is safe here with this staff and it is not a light thing when you talk about that. But I hope that what we could add is like leveraging how we do sports is not gonna work. It's because what we saw as a result, one of the things that because of SHAP, you see the sports and community and it's just all, to me, messed up. That's my description of it, but how we try to fund sports and just the teams and it's just not good. So I don't even know how much cost savings there, but I'm hoping that we can have a conversation around our city school sports, both magnet and non-magnet.
If we wanted to have a longer conversation about this as well, is that like a workshop thing, or is that like an agenda item on the next finance? Like, how do we actively do something about these suggestions procedurally? Like, is this just a, let's meet, set up another retreat day, like, cause it's gotta be official if we're all gonna be here, right? Like, it's gotta be like an official meeting.
I will offer that as part of that. There's some historical context around the decisions that were made and the boundaries that we were trying to stay within the first time.
Sure, I mean,
What
that-
we achieved and then,
I'm not necessarily even trying to discuss why we did the way we did things, it's more like. We all have a shit ton of, a bunch of ideas that we're like throwing out right now, and not many of them are actionable. So I think we end up getting into this loop and without having a session where we can actually have an idea, talk about said idea, and then do something about it. I think everybody just ends up talking about the same thing over and over and over ad nauseum forever. So I think we need a better way of doing this conversation productively and actually having a result at the end of it. So I don't know if that's add this to the next finance committee agenda with a time limit or set up a workshop or a retreat day. But I think that's what we should do, because I think all this is important and merits that discussion on it.
well, a chef conversation I heard, like
Mhm.
understanding that and perhaps is a longer session.
But even just, I
Right, I thought
guess,
someone asked
like
about,
other
I
revenue
thought
background
For the policy committee to.
Oh,
discuss
policy,
some of these
yes.
things, yeah, I mean, I think the workshops are helpful to the extent that they're gonna bring like a better framework for us to understand all of these and the history and context behind why things are the way they are. So that way, when we're questioning and we're deciding, we're being informed about those things.
we need some like working sessions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that we have no desire to let anybody else manage our magnet. Well, that's, they're part of our school. They're not a set aside thing. They are our schools with our kids and like, I don't,
What?
Just with a
and
handful
trying
of
to
it.
manage our magnet schools.
no, it was suggested on the Blue Ribbon Commission meeting, their meeting.
Uh-huh.
It was suggested that we give up the management of our magnet schools.
I don't think it was so much suggested as it was an opinion.
Not of
Ms.
the, and not even
Ms.
of the
Horton
committee.
Schaaf. Ms.
Yeah,
Horton
not the
Schaaf
committee,
said
a
that.
visitor of the committee.
Why? Oh, never mind.
It's
Yeah,
I ain't-
it's
I ain't- never
exactly-
mind.
You-
Never mind. Never mind.
Not is that.
Yeah. I just have a really quick question. If you could just go back to the 5-year plan. I'm sorry, I have one quick question. Has this been presented to the MAR?
It was presented to Marvin this spring.
It was. Okay, great. Thank you. That was my question. Okay, moving along. 1.05 is a discussion on a resolution calling for full permanent funding of public schools, which is quite relevant after today's very lively discussion. This is a resolution that was provided to us, or was recommended to us by the union president, or the Hartford Teachers Union President, Ms. Carol Gale. She provided this to us. There was a rally, was that last Monday? Feels like yesterday, a whole week ago today, at HMTCA, where effectively we would just be, as a board, just bringing to light the fact, right, that ESSER funding is ending and so on and so forth. So the whole resolution is here. I'm not sure if you've read through it, if there's any discussion, if we want to move forward to call for a vote next week at our meeting. I don't believe we've done resolutions like this in the past, if I understand the history right.
Funding, no, other resolution.
We have done resolutions.
Okay, but not.
Yeah. not-
I guess, have we adopted other people's resolutions? Like, I think that's. Right, like,
So this one is not specific to Hartford, as I understand it. This one is what the entire national group that's requesting more funding has put forward. And that's what Ms. Gale has given us.
yeah, no, I got you. My question is more of a procedurally, how do we go about putting a resolution, adopting a different resolution? Right, like, are we saying like, we resolve that we support this resolution? I guess is the question, right? Like, that's the phrasing technically, yeah.
I guess really.
So I think we put out that the board of
Resolve
Hartford
to-
School, we adopt this resolution and
Yeah.
fully support it.
Okay,
Just
cool.
Yeah.
symbolic, seems like, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's any questions on it, any thoughts on going forward with it.
So we vote on this at our meeting on Tuesday, the next board meeting.
Yeah,
Do we need a motion to do that? No, we just do it.
we will vote on it at the meeting. We're just discussing it here, because this is the next meeting after we received it, so.
Well, I think we should do it.
Yeah, I mean, the last two steps of it seem like action one and would be, it's hard to argue against the first thing, which is fully funding Title I and IDEA. That would feel like, yes. And the other one is calling on the state, I guess, every state probably is general statement. Provide adequate, sustainable funding to districts to mitigate the harm caused by decades of unfunded schools, underfunded schools. That also feels like. who could
Just
be
what we
against-
were talking
I mean,
about.
who could be against it? So, I wouldn't have a problem.
Can we push back? a
Oh,
little
I'm
bit?
sure I can find some people.
Let me push back to see if we have to add, if the board has to add. So a legislator will say, well, what are you doing to help mitigate or? What steps are you taking? I don't know that we need to add something here, but I just,
Oh,
should we?
We should be prepared to
Should-
answer that.
Or is it that whereas Hartford Public Board of Education will take steps to be fiscally responsive, not saying that we're not. But I don't know if a legislator will see this and say, well, sure, but what skin do you have in the game? I don't know.
I should just.
I'm not familiar with similar resolutions, so I just wonder how it would be received on the other side. I think we definitely should.
Yeah,
Everything we do is gonna be received poorly by the state, so what's the
Oh,
purpose?
yeah.
I mean,
I'm not
it-
saying don't do it, I'm just saying.
you know,
But I think that's sort of my
it's-
response is,
It's
whatever
symbolic.
we ask for is
Oh,
gonna
I-
be
So-
like,
so it's
nah,
not
anybody
like
so
it's-
just ask it.
Oh,
And like it's symbolic in the sense that, I mean, how do they argue against it? It's. I think the stuff that Deputy Foster is our response. I mean, they come to ask what we're doing. First of all, we're only asking based on need. We're not asking because we're like best fiscal students in the universe of money. This is strictly based on need, and then, if we don't have the need, don't give us the money, but we have the need.
I'm,
Oh, we're
I'm
saying
with you, I'm just
that's all.
replaying the other side, because they always say, oh, there goes Hartford again.
Yeah, that's an excuse not to give us the money. They have to
Of
start-
course.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that's why we don't get into that game, because it's, shoot. They, everybody wastes money.
And you as a board are doing things, right?
Right.
You're trying to, you know, look at right sizing and all of these things.
Right, right.
Okay, any other discussion on this? No. Okay. All right. With that, the next item on the agenda is executive session around personnel matter. We are we're continuing on the evaluation goal setting with Dr. Torres Rodriguez. Do I have a motion? Oh, I'm sorry, no. Do I ask for a motion first and then say we're taking it? Sorry.
Move to go to executive session.
Second.
Second.
The air.
Yeah, we have
Are
to.
bringing
Thanks,
with
Mr.
us, hold on. They have to hear it. We are bringing with us to executive session, Dr. Torres Rodriguez, Ms. Christina Santiago, and Ms. Laura Mazarak, our attorney. Thank you for attending tonight's meeting. We appreciate your interest in the Finance Committee, and we will see you soon.